Okay. So hello and welcome to our 9th fall presentation. Amidst remote learning, many robotics students have lost this opportunity to obtain the hands-on experience they once had. Therefore, the FTC team 14 to 20, Nemesis Prime, has been reaching out to professionals asking to give presentations about themselves, their professional journey, and a fascinating topic about their specific profession. Today, we have Bill Bluethmann. He is an engineer and project manager at the NASA Space Center. For the past 25 years, he's worked on a variety of space robotics projects, and in his free time, he's helped coach the FRC team, the Robonauts. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, thank you for the nice introduction. All right, I'm Bill Bluethmann. If anybody has questions, I'm not here alone. Just to my right side is my daughter Grace, who is a 9th grader joining the Robonauts for her first year, starting this spring. So if there's any questions about how we do robotics in Texas, maybe she can answer some questions, or certainly we can put our heads together.
I've done it for many years, like even without.
Yeah, so she's a long-time robotics student, even though she's only a freshman in high school.
So if anyone has any questions, they're more than welcome to put it in the YouTube chat on the side, and I will ask them. So Mr. Bluethmann, you will be able to really just run through your presentation, and I'll interrupt you if anyone has any questions.
Great.
Whenever you're ready, go for it.
Okay. All right, let me show my slides here. All right, can you confirm my slides are sharing?
Yes, they are starting, stopping.
Blinking. They're like blinking, right? Is that what it looks like?
Yeah.
Oh boy, let me try this. I'm going to stop sharing and maybe share just the application. See if that does anything for us. Okay, that looks a little more solid, doesn't it?
There we go. Now it's on. Cool.
Okay, great. All right. Well, hey, everybody. As Mr. Brady said, I am Bill Bluethmann. I live in Houston, Texas. I work at the NASA Johnson Space Center, the home of human spaceflight. And today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about a project I've been working on for the last couple of years, and its history dates back even a few years before that, called VIPER, which stands for the Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration Rover. So I'll tell you a little bit about the mission, a little bit about the rover, a little bit about some of our science instruments, what we're trying to do, and really why we're doing this. So we'll get right into it. So maybe we'll start off with, I'll just tell you a little bit about me. I think we've got some time, so I'll kind of talk through it. But for me, I'm a lot like you. I'm a guy that likes robotics. As I said before, I'm a mechanical engineer. I have a background in mechanical engineering, but for most of my career, I've done software and control systems. So, or at least during my technical career, that's what I did. We said I'm at JSC. My current job is I'm running a rover project, a space flight project called VIPER, which I'm going to tell you about today. It's a small, relatively lunar rover without people. It's going to go for a search for volatiles and water at the lunar South Pole. I've had a lot of cool jobs in my career. I've built some human rovers, some concept vehicles. I've worked on a lot of dexterous robotics things. And my first job was really cool. I was part of a much broader team, much larger than I've worked subsequently in my career. That was sorting through how we're going to assemble the International Space Station. About my personal life, I'm married. Been married. We'll be having our 20th anniversary next October. I have 2 high school kids. Sort of met Grace earlier. I live a pretty simple life. I work, I coach robotics teams, and I golf. In my robotics coaching activities, I've achieved what I really want, which is never to get higher than an assistant coach. So I really like to help out without having to do all organizations. And it allows me really to not so much work on some of the hard parts, which is making sure people are fed on trips and making sure people show up to practice and calling parents if people misbehave, but really just working with the kids and kind of doing coaching and mentoring. Kind of where I grew up, I was born in Kansas City, grew up in Denver, went to school back a little bit outside of Kansas City and lived in Houston for 25 years next year. Let me see my job on the Robonauts. So I've been a Robonauts mentor for this I guess this spring will be my 23rd year. No, 24th year. I started 2nd year. So this is a big year for the Robonauts. So 25th year. My job on the Robonauts is software and autonomy. And again, for many years, I did robotics because it was fun for me. And a couple of years ago, when my son was a freshman, it became a family activity. It's really been it's really changed our family and really enhanced our family. And since Grace was in middle school, I was a coach for her middle school team with a program that's kind of probably center of gravity is in Texas, but it's kind of all over the U.S. called BEST, Boosting Engineering, Science, and Technology. It's a little bit different. It's a cool thing where they give you just a kit of parts. It's a relatively constrained set of pretty simple parts that you use. They use VEX motors, VEX Cortex, but a lot of the building materials tend to be plywood and PVC. So it's a really nice program, and it fosters a lot of creativity, a lot of different ways of thinking.
What's the name of that program again?
BEST Robotics.
BEST?
Yeah, BEST.
Okay.
Yeah, it's worth looking at. It's a fun program, wouldn't you say, Grace? Again, it's a little bit different from, I don't know FTC well, I know FRC well. It's a little bit different in that it's much less mentor driven. It's very student focused. Okay, for any of the students online, it's okay to ask questions. This is something for my whole career, I just talked and talked and talked. And I just realized that nobody asks questions because they don't want to sound stupid. But it turns my experience, it turns out that if you don't understand something, then you're probably not the only one. So so somebody else is probably saying, what you just said didn't make sense. So feel free to ask. And typically when it's my fault I didn't explain things well enough. So keep that in mind as I go through this. All right, I'm going to start with the big picture here. This is what NASA's vision of the next few decades entails. So this is really a return to humans by 2024. There's a big sprint within the agency to get humans back to the lunar surface in a few years with a longer term goal of sustained presence on the lunar surface. So really start to get there, set up base camps and kind of grow and really understand, one, more about the moon, and two, what it's like to live off the surface. NASA just celebrated 20 years of continuous human presence. We've had, for probably just about everybody on this call, except for Mr. Brady and me, there's been a human in space every day of everyone's life. It's really an incredible achievement for not just my community in Texas, not just our community in the US, but really the entire world, because the space station is an international affair where there's astronauts and engineers on the ground from many countries. So my little part of that, so I talked about living off the land. So our project is VIPER. I kind of described it a little bit earlier. But VIPER is really going to start understanding, the first steps of how do we live off the land. So that really living off the land on the moon is not about growing plants, but it's really understanding the resources. And there's a few key resources on the lunar surface that really matter. One is sun. So the sun is really important, right? So the ability to generate energy is very, very important. But there's a couple other things that we really care about, which is water, volatiles. So think of things that you can use to live off of. So what does it take? It takes create a little energy, have some oxygen, have some hydrogen, and I've got a little bit more on that. So before I go on this, there's a mission video our public affairs folks put together, and maybe we'll see how this plays. This is pulled off YouTube. This is just kind of gives a sense for what we're trying to do on VIPER. That will probably put it much more eloquently than I will. Okay, so it's a little introduction. I'll go in a little bit more into this as we go through this. So lunar volatiles, what are they? Why do we care? So really what volatiles are minerals kind of trapped within the lunar soil. We call that the regolith, which is just kind of a fancy word for soil. These are things that contains hydrogen, water, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, different forms of helium and others. Our particular interest within VIPER is water ice and the hydrogen that is trapped near the poles. The poles is important because of the way it's sunlit. So for many years, it was thought the moon was thought to be a dry body. In recent years, I'll kind of take us through the timeline in a couple of slides. It's thought to be dry, but it turns out that the way the conditions are at the poles, there's areas that are permanently shadowed. So there's areas that for maybe billions of years have never seen the sun. So think of areas where there's a relatively large crater impact. And then because they're at the poles, the sun is relatively low on the horizon. So you might have a crater rim and then a crater bottom, and the sun never gets high enough above that crater rim to see the ground. So over millions of years, small amounts of water collect, via maybe asteroid strikes or comet hits through again over not over lifetimes, but over geological periods. It collect, and there's a very large amount of water believed to be at the poles of the moon. So again, where we think it is, there's certainly going to be on the surface of permanently shallow regions, and also there's some expectation that in the first meter, say the first 3 feet or so of the surface, there'll be some conditions that will be able to capture some of this volatile. So the key things is understanding what it's about, and I showed in the video, so I won't have to go more, but it's about the hydrogen. The H of the H2O is hydrogen for fuel, and the oxygen can be used for breathing. And of course, when you speak to an astronaut, they say, okay, I'm also interested in water. So you could kind of keep, instead of breaking it apart, you could keep the H and the H and the O together and use it for drinking water. So I talked about this a little bit, but this shows you a little bit where we expect to find water at the pole. So it'll be largely in these craters. When I say water, I probably need to clarify a little bit. It's not like it's puddles of water or oceans of water. Think of it as a frosty dirt. So there's a little bit like there's frost on the dirt. So down to a 1 to 5% by weight or volume. So it's a relatively small amount. A couple of years ago, I was chatting with a lunar geologist, and he was he says within their community they debate whether the ice in these permanently shadowed regions are more like icy dirt or dirty ice. And I think probably the way people think it's more like icy dirt. So again, so you'll see you tend to see water or volatiles kind of collected near these permanently shadowed regions. So for what we care about, so you do want to understand from a controls, as you think about the science of it, dry, so you can kind of as your control. There's areas where the water is expected to be deep, which is about between 0.5 meter and 1 meter. So we'll say between 20 and 40 inches. Areas where it's expected to be shallow, between the surface and 0.5 meter or about 20 inches. And then in these permanently shallow regions, you'll be able to expect to find ice on the surface. So then the big question is, if it is shallow, deep, or on the surface, how hard comparatively is it get to it? And that will really be for future missions beyond VIPER. VIPER's real mission goals are to really understand really how is the water distributed, where is the water, and how hard is it to get to? And then future, for lack of a better term, mining-like missions will go and start to harvest some of that water and start to see if they can convert the water, get the water out of the dirt, and start to break it down to its constituent components of hydrogen and oxygen. Okay, so why? Why? This is something that is relatively new development in history. So for many years, the community thought that the moon was a dry body, that it was dead. It was a dead body, a dry body. But starting in the mid-90s, there was just a few missions that started to raise some questions about whether it was perhaps not quite dead or dry. So there's a mission in 1994, Clementine, which I have to go back and check my sources. I believe is an Air Force mission, and they're doing some radar tests, and they got some results that didn't make sense. So sometimes you can think it's your sensor, but they started asking the questions: is that they put energy into the moon, and the energy came back out, and it wasn't what they expected. So some people started to ask, okay, well maybe it's not us. It's just the moon is not like we thought. So they followed that up a couple of years later with the Lunar Prospector mission, which again flew over as an orbital mission, and they measured neutrons coming out of the hydrogen a little bit higher than they thought. So they wouldn't have expected hydrogen in these shadow craters. So they said, oh well, okay, maybe there's ice. And then a number of members on our VIPER team were also members of this LCROSS missions, and it was a brilliant mission. They took the top of the first stage of their rocket, the Centaur rocket, and crashed it into Cabeus crater. And as you can imagine, it threw up a huge debris plume and flew another spacecraft through that plume and effectively sniffed the soil. And they were able to confirm, yea, verily, there is water in the poles of the moon, which is good. It's important, but that's great. So it was a deep, dark crater. Access would be difficult for that. How is it? So that really raised the questions is, if it's there, there's probably other areas where the conditions are right for getting to that water. So how is it disrupted? Where is it? An Indian mission a couple of years ago confirmed it as well, that there is in fact ice at the poles, Chandrayaan-1. So the next up is VIPER, which again, it's going to look for the water ice at the lunar poles to start understanding really the availability of water at human scale. So not in deep shadow craters, but in scales where we could use it to support our human flight missions. And then really use to tie a lot of samples back to the large body of orbital data to start saying, okay, we see this measurement here. We saw something from the orbital they can start tying these points together and really starting to grow regional mineral maps, so water maps for where the water is expected to be. Not just where we take the measurements, but a little bit more broadly as we correlate the remote sensed data and the sample data on Earth. All right, so a little bit more about VIPER. So we've got really two key science objectives. The first is to really understand how that water is distributed at the surface. This gets back to that on the surface in the first half meter, second half meter dry, and to really determine the physical state of it. Is it H2O? Is it O2, OH? Is it just H that's trapped in the water? And to help understand where it's from and help understand it. So that's kind of the more science side of it. Really, how is it mixed, and then it'll allow the science team to really understand it better, how it got there, how it's distributed in its history. And then second one is kind of this human spaceflight thing, is to help provide the data to help understand how we could use these materials for future in situ resource utilization at the lunar poles, really building that sustainability. At the poles on the moon are a little bit like the poles here on Earth, where there's seasons, where there's more sun or less sun. So, our plan is to go to the, I guess it'll be the South Pole summer in 2023, late 2023, early 2024. And at those times, the sun will be mostly above the horizon, at least for pretty long periods, for as many as 14 days at a time. So we have a fair amount of sun, but the challenge of that is anybody has driven a car into the sunlight. There's big challenges when the light is low. Certainly, we're a little bit different from the Mars rovers in that we are, because we are much closer on the moon than Mars. The Mars might have as much as a 20-minute round trip to send data back and forth. They really have to operate autonomously. In VIPER, because we have on the order of about 1 to 2 round trip speed of light, we'll be able to operate much more interactively. So we'll be able to send commands up and down kind of at a very high pace compared to how we behave on Mars. So we have kind of some of those advantages. Certainly the on the moon, being in a vacuum, when it's cold, it's really cold. When it's hot, it's really hot. So we got these temperature screens. And then one of the other things that they observed during the L-Cross impactor mission was there were some anomalous readings where the heat temperatures were just a few milliseconds later than they expected. So some of the speculation would be that the soil is in these permanently shadowed regions is really unconsolidated. So it's really fluffy. So there's all these mission challenges that we are expecting to face. So for our mission specs, we're going to be about 100 Earth Day mission. We're going to carry 3 spectrometers: a neutron spectrometer, a near-infrared spectrometer, and a mass spectrometer. And then we're going to carry a drill, and the drill will really pull up what's subsurface. So if you want to think of it a little more broadly, the way we'll operate these instruments is the neutron spectrometer will determine kind of across the surface how much hydrogen is, we'll say, in the first meter of the rover, and then the near-infrared, the mass spectrometer, and the drill will work as a team to determine where is that water distributed horizontally or vertically. So as I mentioned, there's not a lot, the water relative to the dirt is pretty small, so we have to be able to measure water concentrations down to 0.5% by weight. We'll have a 1 meter drill. We'll do it on the order of 30 to 40 drillings. Talked about the sun being out. There are times when the sun goes down, so there's sign sets, so we have to do this hibernation. So the rover will have to be able to survive for 70 hours in the cold. Yes.
How exactly do the instruments work? So I noticed that there's a 1 millimeter drill. Are the instruments able to detect it from a long distance, from wherever the bottom of the robot is to the surface? Or do you need to use the 1 millimeter drill to take in some sediment and soil or whatever?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's a good question. So the way that, that's a really good question. The way the drill will work, it'll take it'll drill in 10 centimeters at a time and pull up the shavings from that, and the near infrared spectrometer, the mass spectrometer, are on the belly of the rover. So they'll be maybe yay high, say 15 to 18 inches above the surface. And the near infrared will kind of look at the spectra, so they'll kind of get a sense for how much water's by how the reflectance of the material. The mass spectrometer will do direct measurements. So basically, when the materials come up, it hits the vacuum and it will sublime immediately, and then some of those materials will make their way into the spectrometer, and it'll kind of work its way through to measure the mass spec. So it's not touching, the instruments are not directly touching the regolith, but they are in near proximity. It's a good question.
With the 1 meter drill, how exactly what is the chance of that breaking, and if so, how would it be fixed?
Well, this is there's no people on this. There's a non-human.
Yeah.
So we've been, actually, that's a very insightful question. That's something we, to say debate is not, but it's something we carry as a potential risk. There's probably not so much of a risk of the drill breaking, but more of a risk of the drill getting stuck. So a stuck drill is a real potential problem. The way we're going to manage it is, one is we're going to test and test and test and test. And I'm not a member of the drill team, but they worked really hard to get that drill stuck, where they drill in straight and they can't get it stuck. They drill at an angle and then put in even a little bit more bending. And in the materials they've tested, it seems to be hard to get stuck. If you truly do find yourself in a stuck drill position, there's a few things. It could be mission ending, but you might be able to use the base a little bit to kind of work it free a little bit, but it might take a while to get that done. I won't spend a lot of time. I think it's always taking a little bit longer to get through this, but I won't spend a lot of time. But again, here's a little bit more about our instruments. So the NSS neutron spectrometer is done by NASA Ames and Lockheed Martin. Then the NIRVIS is the near infrared spectrometer, also done at NASA Ames in coordination with the Brimrose Corp. This one sits up underneath the rover. The NSS sits on the front of the rover. M-SOLO is the mass spectrometer done by the Kennedy Space Center with a handful of partners there. And then Trident is done on something we call a Small Business Innovation Research Grant with Honeybee Robotics, which is a small space robotics company in Southern California that'll be providing the drill. Now, a little bit more about the rover. The rover is going to be about 430 kilograms. It's going to be a solar powered rover, and that's a little bit contrasted to some of the Mars rovers that have a combination of solar and heat. So it's also going to have the ability to store energy with batteries, lithium-ion batteries. That's really how we'll do our 70 hours of survival, hibernation survival. We're not going to have a comm relay, so we'll be talking directly to and from Earth using the Deep Space Network and X-band. From a size perspective, I won't talk about that because we'll see a little bit more about how it compares to some other things in the next slide. But we're a real cruiser. It's normally we'll move about 10 centimeters per second. It's about 4 inches, about go about that far every second. So and when we sprint, it's about 20 centimeters per second. So it's kind of about how fast at a sprint speed, about how fast you could walk if you're kind of walking heel to toe. It's pretty slow. Designed to go over obstacles about 20 centimeters, which are, I don't know, maybe on the size of a volleyball or a soccer ball. And then one of the cool things about this, and I've got a video later, so I won't go too much, but each of the 4 wheels, of course, rotates. Each of the 4 wheels steers independently, which is similar to the Mars rovers. The 4 corners can steer and drive. The middles don't steer. And then we have this, what we call an adjustable suspension, which allows us to move up each of the 4 wheels up and down independently, which will allow us to do a few things, including this really interesting behavior we call a swimming or crawling. I've got a video of that later. All right, so here's a little bit more kind of how we're laid out. And you can see kind of starting at the bottom, up underneath, you have the two spectrometers, the mass spectrometer and the near infrared spectrometer. Around on the front side, we just have materials that really just hold in the heat, so multi-layer insulation around the back of the back three sides, so the two sides and the rear. We have solar arrays. So as I mentioned before, the sun is relatively low on the horizon. So as a result, our solar arrays are on the sides. We have battery on the inside. We have, of course, all of our communication boxes, our motor controllers, our flight computer on the inside, and in this what we call a warm box. Right in the belly of the beast is this drill. So it's kind of sticking out the top, goes right down through the middle of the rover, and that's where it drills into it. Then we have a gimbal. Our gimbal contains really two functions. It has our communication antennas and our driving cameras. So we'll use cameras to create stereo pairs and use those for the drivers to provide. And then the last thing to kind of highlight is on top. So what you want to do is you want to, on the space, because you can't blow away the heat, you have to radiate that heat, and you want to radiate to something cold. And the deep space is cold, so it will be radiating to the approximate 4 Kelvin, 3 or 4 Kelvin deep space. So that will allows us to really reject that heat well when you want to, and our thermal system, of course, has the ability to turn, when we want to stay warm, it has the ability to turn that off and keep as much of the heat inside as possible. All right, so this is kind of where VIPER sits relative to some of the other space rovers. And you'll notice there's not been a lot. You know, I had somebody tell me recently, he says, what do you mean we've put cameras on the moon, you know, for a year, we put things on the moon for years, but really it's not been that many. You know, there was the lunar roving vehicle that the astronauts drove around in the later Apollo missions. The Soviet Union flew a nuclear-powered, and solar-powered rover called Lunokhod, drove it around, and it held the duration record for a lot of years until broken by one of the MERs. And then coming in the mid 90s to the 2000s, you know, and beyond, you know, we had the Mars rovers, you know, Sojourner, which is really just a pathfinder to figure out whether you could actually do small rover exploration of the moon. And then just kind of, they continue to grow a little bit. They're still, you know, pretty small. So, you know, Mars exploration rover, the Spirit and Opportunity, where, you know, I don't know, maybe a little bit smaller than a golf cart. They described the Mars Science Laboratory, the MSL Curiosity, that's operating now, the size of the Mini Cooper. And in transit now is Mars 2020, which is maybe a look-alike to the Mars Science Laboratory. So and then U2 is flown by China. It's kind of pretty similar in size to VIPER, and then you see VIPER there. You see that, Grace? So you can see VIPER is kind of in between. It's relatively dense because it's got a lot of batteries, because it does not have a radio isotope heaters that some of the other Mars rovers or Lunokhod had.
So does that limit
Right.
its mobility and its where it can go on the moon?
It doesn't so much limit it only to small effects. You know, it's you know, in fact, it helps a little bit. It adds a little bit more mass, but having all those batteries to keep those low, so it does lower our center of gravity a little bit. So it allows us to maybe to be a little bit less tipsy. So I talked about the ability to drive. So this is at a test facility in Cleveland at the NASA Glenn Research Center, a place called the Slope Lab. And we took so I showed that this thing weighs about 430 kilograms. The gravitational force on the moon is about 1/6 the acceleration here on Earth. So if you weigh 100 pounds on Earth, if you were to go to the moon, you'd only weigh 16 pounds or thereabouts, a little over 16 pounds. So what I'll show you here is a test vehicle that is not the same mass in kilograms as what we'll see on the moon, but the same weight in newtons as you'd see on the moon. So we call this our Moon Gravity Representative Unit, or MGRU. This is some work done about just over a year ago. So, and for those of you who are paying attention, so you'll notice that a couple of our team here are Robonauts coaches. So Emily and Parker are, both Emily and Parker were on FRC teams when they were high school, and we eventually hired them, and now are both robotics coaches. So this is us driving on something that the guys, the Glenn team calls, this is called the sink tank. And they call it the sink tank because everything that goes into this, that sandbox sinks. So you can see that the rover here is doing this. So this is this crawling behavior I was telling you about, where it kind of swims or crawls through it. So it's kind of a fault protection thing. So if we get stuck in really, really soft soil, we have some ability to kind of crawl and fight and climb our way out. So it's a way to get out of being embedded. I got one more. This is a prior version of that rover doing kind of similar things. This is in the outdoors, so you can see it dries until it gets stuck, and then it kind of crawls up that hill a little bit, crawls until it gets over the peak of that hill. And it kind of rolls down the hill and then dries till it gets stuck again in this kind of wet, soft soil. This rover was actually heavy, so this was actually the appropriate mass. So it was about 6 times heavier than what we'd see on. It's about 6 times heavier than what I saw in the previous video. So it kind of crawls. You can see it's digging itself in, and it kind of crawls itself sideways a little bit till it finds a little bit firmer ground, rotates, crawls in a little bit different direction. And so it's kind of working, it found itself into a low spot. So it's crawling its way out. Once it gets to the top of the hill, you'll see that it drives back down off the hill. My way of thinking about this behavior is a really important behavior, but the time we have to invoke it is going to be a pretty bad day, because you don't want, it's kind of the mission is at risk, and you'll save the mission, but you'd rather kind of protect the rover and keep it out of the really, really soft stuff. And I think the way our operations teams will behave is they'll be relatively conservative in the early part of the mission, while they understand the capabilities and the terrain, as it's a relatively new environment. And as they get to understand both the environment and the rover's capabilities better in flight, they may take some more adventurous type moves to really get the benefit of additional science. Okay, I've just got a couple slides on our ride. So there's this program in NASA. It's called Commercial Lunar Payload Services. We call it CLPS. And it's just a different way of thinking about getting equipment to the moon, or the cislunar area in the vicinity of the moon. And it's effectively, our ride. And the concept is that we buy a lander service. So we don't kind of work as we say, okay, well, here are requirements to get us to the moon, get us there, get us to this location on this date, and it's going to have this much mass. And we do it, and there's kind of a pool of vendors. A number of them you've probably heard of. There's Lockheed Martin's, SpaceX, Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' rocket company, and then a number of smaller companies that folks may not have heard of. I guess Draper's a part of that contract too, so I guess they're old school. A company called Maston, which has done a lot of work. Our particular ride is a new space company called Astrobotic, and they're a spinoff out of Carnegie Mellon University. In fact, they're somewhat spun out of a robotics lab. So they've got kind of this robotic DNA and this adventurous spirit that a lot of robotics pioneers are. And so they're really, really they're a great company, and we really like working with them. So, but again, all we do is we build our rover, and NASA has bought this service. So we deliver our rover not to the rocket company, not to the moon. We just deliver it to Astrobotic, and they're responsible for integrating the VIPER rover onto their lander. And then after that's done, they'll integrate their lander rover stack onto the launch vehicle. The launch vehicle provider will get them off the surface, at which point, and when they're ready to land, Astrobotic will get us safely landed, will egress, and then that's when the VIPER mission will start. It's a really neat concept, and the whole idea is the government wants to really tap into the innovative commercial world, where they can be able to do things in a different way, with the long-term goal of being able to get services to the moon less expensive. And of course, if you can get there less expensively, that means you can do more. So in the long term, this is really good for space to be able to have this new way of thinking. So I'm really excited about it. And I'll flip through these just pretty quickly. Here's just a couple images that Astrobotic pulled off their website, kind of showing their lander, which is called Griffin, and our rover, which is VIPER. There's a couple kind of fancy CAD renders. Yeah, here's a view of us deployed. Interesting thought is I showed Lunicod a few slides back. The ramps that are on the Griffin lander are inspired by the Lunicod lander, which I think is really cool. Taking old ideas that just worked and doing them again. All right, and here's kind of a little bit of a CAD render close-up of a rover on the Griffin lander. Okay, and I've just got a couple more slides, and then we can kind of get into Q&A. So where do you land? How do you figure out where to land? You want to be at the South Pole because that's where it's cold, but there's all these constraints, and those constraints are always changing because the in a 14-day period, one lunar day, the Earth will go all the way around the horizon. So you have to do this balancing act of we in a perfect world, what you want to land is a place where you have a lot of sun, right? So that's this green thing, right? Sun, plenty of sun, but when the sun hits the volatiles, they sublime. So you also got to have a place where it's close to places that are dark. As I mentioned before, you have to be able to always see the Earth, so direct to and from Earth. So you have a direct line of sight of Earth, and then you can't find a place where we'll say a really big crater that you can see the Earth for a long period of time that's well sunlit. Down at the bottom of the crater, there's volatiles, but if it's too steep, you got to do it. So there's our team that's planning these has all these constraints, and they do a really interesting job. They've got some really nice tools they developed to do this. So kind of this kind of shows how they do it. So they get these resource maps, and they kind of lay map layer over map layer over map layer. So you can see the areas of interest will be the red areas. These are permanently shadowed regions, a place where we expect ice to be on the top. And then around those, you kind of have areas where there's going to be some volatiles remaining, maybe a little bit buried. At the shallow, it's green, and the deep is deep down to a meter. And then you kind of everywhere else, the gray and pinkish is all areas where expect to be dry. So one thing to note this area here where it's kind of pinkish for this next one. So then they take a look at it. So the land somewhere in here. And there's this great region, but you'll notice how, on this prior one, there's the same crater. You had all these areas you couldn't go to. So the quickest way your quickest path would be, go from here straight to here. But you have all this deep terrain here. So you notice how they have to go around, come in kind of the backside and come back out the other way. And you see the other thing you probably want to note here, you see this looks like there's pedals, right? It goes out. He goes out and comes back, goes out and comes back, goes out and comes back, goes out and comes back. So the thought there is you land on a relatively high area so that you have a relatively large amount of sun in the high area, and then you kind of explore and come back. And that might be an area where you have a relatively shorter amount of time where you have to survive in the dark. So our science team has these really incredible tools that are really making this thing that used to be a little bit of an art and more of a science, and it's really, really impressive to see. And I think this actually might be my last real slide. So then this is kind of how we'll drive, maybe this is my second slide, how we'll drive the rover. You can see this is, I just love this on this video on the right, on the lower right there. This is a simulation. This is not real. This is a very highly rendered driving simulation where it gives you a sense. We've looked at models of how many rocks there are per square meter, how many craters of a different size per square meter. We've reconstructed this terrain. And you can see this rover driving through this simulated lunar terrain. The way the drivers are going to drive are going to be that, let's say it wakes up, it opens its eyes, and it looks around, and it will create a sterile map. And you can see over time it builds these maps, and the things that are green are safe, where you can go into, and the places that are red are thought to be hazards. You want to avoid the hazards. So again, as it moves through this world, it kind of creates bigger and bigger and bigger maps to drive through. So you'll drivers will look at them, they'll create them, they'll update the map. The drivers kind of make a decision about where they want to go next, where the safe kind of moves, in the direction you want to go over the long term. They'll double check that it's safe. They'll upload the command. The robot will move for about 4 to 6 meters, so 4 to 6 meters, 4 to 8 meters. So think about this, I don't know, maybe the size of the length of my bedroom here. So, so maybe 6 or 8 or 10 steps. It's not very far. And then it all starts over again. They, snap pictures, downlink the pictures, update the map, and, make some decisions about where the next best step is going. And they kind of slowly, methodically kind of work through this, work across the surface. Yeah, that was my last one. All right. So I think we've got a few minutes here. So that's what I had for y'all. But we can ask questions. I'd be happy to take questions about VIPER. If anybody wants to ask about colleges, careers, I'll tell you what I know, which, it's been a while since I've been in school, but I'll tell you what I know. And if anybody wants to ask about the Robonauts, I'd certainly be willing to answer what I know. And Grace is here to help me if there's something I don't know.
Actually, there was a lot of cool things about VIPER. I do have one question regarding VIPER, and I think you mentioned the Griffin. Is Griffin just supposed to be the lander, and that's really its main purpose, or is there more of a collaboration that will exist between Griffin and VIPER?
So for us, yes, there's a big collaboration, but the lander is a lander. Really, its job is to get VIPER to the lunar surface softly, and then we can get off, and then it'll probably stay alive for a while before it freezes. But from an astrobotics perspective, Griffin is not a lander designed for VIPER. It's a medium-sized lander. So it's a more generic nine that it has some kind of special. It has the VIPER-sized ramps, and it has accommodation for VIPER. But really, it is the astrobotic mid-size lander where they could take any payload. Or they have an earlier mission on their other lander, which is Peregrine, which is a smaller lander, and they're taking a bunch of payloads, like 14 or so payloads. So they can just take a lot of, they can have big payloads like VIPER, or they can also take some number of smaller payloads. But I see where you're going. I think I finally get your answer. Once, so VIPER is not dependent on the lander, the Griffin lander, after we depart. So they'll be provided in transit while we're going from the Earth to the Moon, and until we release. They provide power to VIPER. But once we release, we're not doing this. We're not using them as a comm relay, because the thought would be we're going to move away from them after a pretty short period, so we wouldn't be able to have a direct line of sight. Although I do know that is one of the service Astrobotic does offer to some other clients. They'll kind of set up a Wi-Fi, something analogous to a Wi-Fi network, kind of in the vicinity of their lander.
Yeah, I would recommend anyone watching the video to actually just go to the Astrobotic website. During the presentation, I actually pulled it up, and there's some really interesting, they talk about their missions, the landers. It's really cool.
Yeah.
So, Mr.
Good
Bluethmann, I have
company.
a question about your pathway. Where'd you start off with? How'd you get into the position you're at today?
How well? I was a lucky guy. Well, I'll go way back. So um, I grew up in a family, and I learned about being an engineer. I wasn't lucky like some of us. Where I didn't have a robotics program I could work on. I learned about engineering kind of by taking things apart, trying to figure out how they worked. So I would, I don't know, take apart the lawnmower and put it back together. I would, the TV would be broken. I would take it apart, see it, figure out, what might have been broken. So I kind of learned about that. But I didn't know any engineers growing up. So I went to college thinking I was going to be a business major. People I knew did. They were business people. And then I went to college and I took the class I wanted to. In my freshman semester, I took the required English. I took computer science, physics, and Calc 2. And eventually somebody convinced me that a kid that chooses, if they pick your own classes and you pick, the core of your curriculum is, physics, calculus, and computer science, maybe business is not the right career for you. So that's what got me there. I went to graduate school, and while I was in graduate school, my university, University of Kansas, we had a partnership with McDonnell Douglas in Huntington Beach, California, where we were helping kind of build some robotic platforms that they would use to qualify some of their payloads for International Space Station. So they would build them. They wouldn't qualify them. They'd test them so they could qualify them at NASA before they flew into the ISS. And through that, I kind of got to know, because there was a connection between that lab and NASA Johnson, because they're qualifying there. I got one of my contacts put me in contact with somebody he knew here in Houston, and I eventually got a job. But and then there's this other really interesting. I had this space station job. It was interesting, but not especially fulfilling. I kind of had more of a research background. And then there's this guy I knew, and he said, I'm doing this thing. It's called First Robotics. You kind of work with high school kids to build robots. And I said, well, okay, I'm kind of bored. I'll go out and see what it's like. And I just loved it. And I got to know some of the other mentors on the team, and eventually they hired me and kind of set me on a very different path relative to my career. That's a good question.
So I guess it would be very beneficial if students looked at universities that might have partnerships with companies or organizations that would allow them to get that hands-on experience, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it is. I didn't do it as an undergrad, but I think I've seen it a lot, probably even more so than when I was a student. That a lot of students do internships or co-ops, where sometimes they'll do summer internships, but we take on a lot of students in the during the semesters, and they'll kind of, instead of they'll take 5 years of degree with like two or more co-op tours, and they get a little hands-on experience. It puts them in a lot better position to kind of be able to get a running start when they enter into their professional career.
Question from the chat. I don't know if this is an actual question, because I know that with FIRST there's a lot of questions about a water game, but this Barodynamics asks, I know the main purpose of this project is for space exploration, but I'm wondering if any of the designs of the VIPER can be used for other things, such as deep sea exploration.
Well, it's interesting. So probably not directly, although because we live here in Houston. Houston has a very large, maybe it's probably the one of the few centers of gravity for oil and gas in the U.S. So I've had some time to interact with folks that work in oil and gas, and I'm going to flip back here. So early in my career, I worked on this project called Robonaut. Robonaut was basically a humanoid robot that was originally designed to work in the same place as spacewalking astronauts did. I've got a picture of it here. I'm sorry, y'all. It's on the About Me, so it's like slide 2. So you see here at the bottom right is kind of Robonaut on a base. So there's certainly a lot of in the space world, there's certainly a lot of overlap. Some of the environmental challenges are the same, that although surviving in water, but the significant pressure is somewhat analogous to the significant lack of pressure we see in space. So the high pressure versus the very low pressure we see. So there is some hardening versus commercial parts. What I was going to say about Robonaut, we did a lot of folks that worked with us on that spun off and kind of left NASA, spun off a company that are doing just that, working on, we'll say, things they learned on this onto underwater robotics. So there's probably a little, I think they would tell you there is absolutely a analogy between space robotics and undersurface robotics. Yeah, that's a good question. But I'm going to say one more thing. But VIPER is a return to the moon, and we do think that a lot of the things we do and learn with our VIPER, so we'll say robotic rover, will have a lot of applicable lessons to things that we'll do on human missions. So I think a lot of what we do on VIPER will translate to, go to my slides again, through my slides, through some of these human rovers. So you see the human rover here. Is there another human? I guess that's the only one here. So a lot of the things we learn on this VIPER rover, which doesn't have people, will be applicable to this human type rover, lunar terrain vehicle. In fact, somebody was asking me for some of our mission documents just today. So they're actively trying to look for lessons learned from our VIPER work in human spaceflight.
Thank you. Actually, I know that your team, Robonauts, has been very, very successful over the years. Can you go through some skills that you guys go through to help prepare students for their future, but then also things that make your team very successful competition-wise?
Sure. Well, some of it is that, in fact, Grace and I were talking about this just last night. We certainly are. We have a very strong mentor base, and we are a student program, but it's both good and bad. But our students they come through the program. Their goal is to kind of learn and get on to college so they can get a degree, maybe go to graduate school or not, and kind of get on with their careers and get on with their lives. But we've had a long-standing, stable mentor base that helps a lot. One of the things that helps, we come from a pretty well-to-do district, so we have nice resources. We've got kind of support. We also have institutional support via NASA. So NASA has been very supportive of the work, not just of our team, but really the work across NASA through Dave Lavery. In fact, Dave first heard about it. He was looking forward, and he was kind of the headquarters executive in charge of this Sojourner rover that I'm not going to flip through my charts because I'm not very good at that. But the kind of the first Mars rover, he was kind of headquarters. And he said, I got a future problem. I'm going to be starting to fly rovers to the moon. And at the time, he was thinking about doing it frequently. And I don't have the right I need to get more robotics PhDs into the world. So that's really what drove Dave to kind of invest, or really work with the agency and the U.S. government to help support that, because it was for very selfish reasons, because he wanted better people coming into our agency. And so the way we do with the students is we definitely have, I don't know, Grace, feel free to hop on and tell me when I'm wrong if you want to. So we tend to give the students responsibilities. We do, we really give the students as much rope as they want, but the mentors are there to help. So we really work as a partnership where it's not the Robonauts mentors doing the work, it's not the students doing it, but we work shoulder to shoulder. Maybe not quite in a peer relationship, but we are together. We are, there's a period where this in FRC where this whole notion of white gloves where the mentors don't, not only can they not touch the robot, they can't even look at the robot. And that's our philosophy, because these, I sure wish I had said when I was even a college student, I wish I had some engineer tell me, you can't hold the shaft that way. You got to put in a bearing. It's good to, I mean, you're laughing, but it's true. I grew up, grew up not knowing engineers. I needed somebody to tell me, if you want to support a shaft, you put in a bearing. So it really is. So it's that partnership. And I think the other thing our team does, we've got 4 goals, and I'm not gonna be able to quote them here, but one of them is we compete. So the thought of, and it's something I learned when I was a kid. I like sports. When you're on the field, you compete. That doesn't mean once you get off the field, you don't get along with your opponents. You compete right on the field, and it's okay. You play a game to win, and as long as you do that honorably, it's okay. It's about growing our family, right? So I guess I can't go. It's you compete, you grow the Robots family. We engage our community in STEM activities, and I think that's evolved a little bit to really engage young people before stereotypes engage. And what's the 4th? She's a newbie. She doesn't know yet.
So definitely hitting the point of the chairman's award.
Yeah. And of course, and the other thing I think we do on the team is every year we have a theme, and those themes are things that'll help us make a better team. And sometimes, they're all over the place. One of them was low CG. So I think in 2006 we built a robot that was really tipsy. So in 2007, the theme of our robot that year was low center of gravity. Sometimes, recently it's been we care, right? So we know that if the mentors act like they care about the students, things will be okay. If the students act like they care about the mentors and care about their teammates, things are going to be better. Caring makes life better. Ownership, where people are empowered to take ownership of a system. What else do we have? White and gold. So we're going to build white and gold robot, right? So we have these themes each year, and these themes build on each other, and they become team values.
Makes sense. Just having a real big team community. There is still an opportunity if anyone who's watching wants to post any other questions. There is a 30-second lag between the video that we're doing right now and posting it on YouTube. So if you have any questions, please make sure you post it. But Mr. Bluethmann, any final thoughts?
Yes, I do have some thoughts for the students and for my daughter who's sitting with me. I've been watching students this year, and this has been a tough year for us all. In fact, the last thing Grace and I did before she was in 8th grade, the last thing we did, we went to the Robonauts one and only competition. We came home and we were immediately quarantined. But I'm really looking forward to the future, because the kind of students that I meet through various robotics competitions really inspire me. They inspire me, and they allow me to believe that the future is going to be better than the past. And for this particular generation, I think this year, and hopefully just a year of COVID and quarantine and pandemic, are really going to make this generation very resilient. So they'll be able to roll with the changes. And I'm very proud of our young people, because this has not been easy for them. And I'm really proud, and I'm looking forward to the future. So I can't wait to see what your generation does.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bluethmann. There is no other question that popped up in the chat. I definitely would love to say that you are a huge part of growth with students. Hopefully not only with the community of Texas, but as you mentioned, you are outreaching, and you're even doing that with us today. And hopefully this video gets shared with a lot of people so that they're able to see what NASA has in store, that it's more than just a rocket ship and more than just a tank drive rover. Had no idea that we had this little swimming style robot that existed.
I know. Well, it will exist soon. It's a prototype,
Okay.
but it's coming. It's coming into space soon.
And there's just,
so this is why I get excited, is because I can tell more people about the great stuff we're doing. And for the students, we need good people. NASA needs good people, but we need more than engineers. We need accountants. We need scientists. We need human resource people. We need leaders. We need people that are good communicators, people that can tell a story, people that have media skills. So we need all sorts of skills. And I'll tell you, for me, it's been a really nice career working within NASA.
I've heard that, and I guess we'll say internships at NASA, but are those mainly offered to like the college age students, or is there ever a possibility of
largely college age students? Although there are bits and pieces, there are some limited opportunities for high school students.
Okay. So if you're in high school, maybe check that out. I know that NASA has worked with FIRST and has supported FIRST for a while. So that would be a really, really great way for you guys to find anything else. Okay, someone else asked, any use for IT admins or network engineers?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. We are a big organization. We, oddly enough, we probably need a lot because NASA has this cachet, right? Where, if you're a hacker, this might be a big win to get into NASA's network. So we kind of need the folks to protect us, but we have large campuses we work not just within our campuses, but there's 10 NASA centers, and we work collaboratively across those centers. So there's a lot of opportunity. And then if you even think more broadly than just kind of IT of what we think about generally, there's kind of the space version of IT, right, which is the communications and the like. So I think there's a lot of work in that general area of IT, communications, RF that needs good people. And the more I look at it, the more certainly on the communications, the RF communication, I think there's a lot of opportunities there because everything you see on the screen has a radio on it, and it needs to be able to talk between the surface or the orbital and back to the Earth, maybe to even other spacecraft.
Well, like I said, I don't think there's any other questions that are popping up. Mr. Bluethmann, I would love to thank you for your time. This was definitely an enriching talk. I never knew any of the things that were going on. I completely didn't realize that we have 3 new projects going up into space. And I really hope that this encourages some of you guys who are watching to pursue like even stronger a career in engineering, or maybe it doesn't have to be engineering. It could be computer science. It could be, as you mentioned, IT, accounting, telecommunication. It's all these things are helping our community grow. Find your niche, but also don't be afraid to take risks and just constantly test out your ideas. So yet again, thank you, Mr. Bluethmann.
Yeah, I totally agree. The things you learn on a robotics team will serve you whatever you want to do. If you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or a police officer or any walk of life, the problem-solving skills you're going to learn in FTC or FRC or VEX or the like will serve you well for the rest of your life.
I feel like the ending screen should be join a team today, but but seriously, if you don't have a FTC, FRC team or even a VEX team, reach out to your community, maybe start your own.